The night my husband vanished, he left two things behind on the kitchen counter: his wedding ring, and a single sentence written on a piece of paper in his handwriting that said, "I'm sorry. Please don't look for me." I read that note 47 times in the first 3 days. I never signed the divorce papers my father kept pushing across the table at me, and 6 months later I found out why Thomas left. What he told me when I finally stood in front of him made me drive straight to my father's house and say something in front of every person he had ever tried to impress. But before I get there, drop your country in the comments right now. I read every single one. If this story hits you, tap like. It helps this channel more than you know. And let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Rebecca Harlow. I am 37 years old. My father built Harlow Capital from a single real estate office in Atlanta into one of the largest private development firms in the southeastern United States. By the time I was 28, I was running 3 divisions. By 32, Forbes had written about me twice. I'd say none of that to impress you. I'd say it because it matters to what happened. Because in my world, everything, every relationship, every handshake, every dinner was filtered through the question of what it was worth. Except Thomas. Thomas Bennett was a middle school science teacher from Savannah, Georgia. He drove a 7-year-old pickup truck and spent his summers volunteering at a rural youth camp in the mountains of North Carolina. The first time my father met him, he shook Thomas's hand, smiled politely, and then pulled me aside 5 minutes later and said, "Rebecca, what exactly is your plan here?" I told him my plan was to marry the man I loved. My father looked at me the way he looked at underperforming assets, patient, disappointed, certain he could fix it. We had been married for 6 years when everything fell apart. Our son Noah was 4 years old. He had Thomas's eyes and my stubbornness, and he was the single best thing either of us had ever done. Our life wasn't glamorous. Thomas taught, worked. We ate dinner together every night we possibly could, and on weekends we took Noah to the park, and Thomas would explain to him how clouds formed and why the sky was blue, and Noah would listen with his whole body the way small children do when someone is telling them something real. I was happy. I want to say that clearly because what came after could make you think I wasn't. I was genuinely, completely happy. The tension was always my father. It lived in the background of our marriage like a low hum you eventually stop hearing but never actually goes away. My father never insulted Thomas directly. He was too calculated for that. Instead, he would ask questions at family dinners that were designed to make Thomas feel small. Questions about career trajectory and retirement planning and whether Thomas had thought about doing something more scalable with his skills. Thomas always answered calmly and without embarrassment, and that calm drove my father absolutely crazy. One Sunday afternoon, Thomas took Noah to a baseball game. My father came to the house. He sat across from me at my own kitchen table, and he said, "Rebecca, I need you to think seriously about your future, not emotionally. Seriously." I asked him what that meant. He told me his business partner's son, a man named Carter Wells, who ran a hedge fund in New York, would be a far more appropriate partner for someone in my position. I stared at my father for a long moment. Then I said very quietly, "I am not a merger, Dad." He didn't flinch. "No," he said, "but you are my daughter. And everything you have, I helped build." I didn't answer him. I should have understood right then what that statement meant. I didn't. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday night in November, I came home from a board meeting to a house that felt wrong the moment I opened the door. Not messy, not broken, just wrong. It's a kind of quiet that has weight to it. Thomas's coat was gone from the hook by the door. Noah's small sneakers were missing from the mat. I walked into the kitchen, and that is when I saw it. The wedding ring on the counter, the note beside it. "Please don't look for me." I stood in my kitchen, in my work clothes, holding a piece of paper, and I could not make the words make sense. He called Thomas's phone 17 times. Straight to voicemail every time. I called his sister in Savannah. She said she hadn't heard from him. I called the youth camp in North Carolina. Nobody had seen him. I drove to his school at 7 in the morning, and his classroom was dark, and his principal told me Thomas had called in a personal leave effective immediately. My father arrived at my house that same morning. I don't remember calling him. He walked in and saw the note and the ring on the counter. He sighed in a way that had no surprise in it whatsoever. He picked up the divorce papers from the folder he had brought, and I didn't even wonder at the time why he already had divorce papers ready. And he set them in front of me. "Sign these today," he said. "Don't humiliate yourself by waiting." I pushed the papers back across the table. He pushed them forward again. "Rebecca?" "No." My father's jaw tightened. "He took our son," I said. My voice was shaking, but my answer wasn't. "He will bring Noah back," my father said dismissively. "Men like Thomas always come back when they need something." Something about the way he said "men like Thomas" stopped me cold, but I was too devastated to follow the feeling. All I knew was that I was not signing those papers. My father left. He came back 3 more times in the following weeks with the same papers. 3 more times I said no. 6 months passed. I hired 2 private investigators. Neither one found Thomas. My father told everyone who asked that Thomas had left for another woman. Said it so consistently and so calmly that people started believing it. Some days I almost believed it myself. Almost. But something refused to settle in me. Thomas was not that man. Whatever had happened, he was not that man. Noah Thomas would never use our son as a weapon. He loved that child too completely. I held on to that. On a Tuesday morning in April, I drove to one of our new construction sites on the east side of Atlanta for a project review. It was a large mixed-use development. 40 stories. 2 years into a 3-year build, I walked the site with the project manager half listening to his updates, my eyes moving the way they had learned to move over 6 months, scanning faces in every crowd, every street, every open space. And then I saw him. He was on the far side of the site, loading steel rebar onto a flatbed cart alongside 3 other workers. His hair was longer, his face was darker from the sun. He was wearing a yellow hard hat and work boots caked in red. Georgia clay, but it was Thomas. I knew his posture the way you know the sound of someone's voice. The project manager was still talking beside me. I was already walking, my heels on the uneven ground, the distance between us closing. One of the workers near Thomas looked up and saw me coming and said something to him. Thomas turned. The moment our eyes met, he went completely still. The rebar cart rolled forward slightly without him and clanged against a concrete barrier. Nobody around us moved. I stopped 2 feet in front of him. 6 months of fear and grief and searching and unanswered questions, it all arrived at once, and it came out as anger. "Where is my son?" My voice cracked on the last word. Thomas didn't flinch. "He's safe," he said quietly. "Noah is safe." That is not an answer. My hands were shaking. "Where is he?" "He's with my sister in Savannah." Thomas said he's been there the whole time. "Safe, Clara. Rebecca, he's safe." The way he almost called me the wrong name told me how fractured he was. 6 months, I said? My voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, and somehow that was worse than shouting. 6 months, Thomas? Not one call. Not one word. Not one, I know. He looked at the ground. "I know. Look at me." He raised his eyes. They were the same eyes, just older. Much older than 6 months should have made them. "Tell me why," I said. "Right now. Tell me." Thomas looked around at the workers who had quietly pretended to go back to work, but were absolutely not working. Then he looked back at me. "Not here," he said. "Here," I said. "Right here, right now." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father came to see me the night before I left." Everything in my chest went cold. "He came to the school," Thomas continued. "He was waiting in the parking lot after my last class. He had 2 men with him." My mouth went dry. Thomas kept his eyes on mine. He told me I had 24 hours to sign the papers and disappear. He said if I didn't, Thomas stopped. His jaw worked. Said if I didn't, Noah would never be found. The construction site noise went completely distant. Like someone had turned the volume of the world down. He said, "What?" Thomas did not look away. He said Noah would disappear. Not me. Noah. He wanted to make sure I understood what the actual threat was. I could feel my heartbeat in my hands. "He called me a charity case," Thomas continued quietly. He said I was an embarrassment to your family name. He said you deserved someone who could actually match your life. My father's voice from that Sunday in my kitchen. Everything you have, I helped build. He already had the papers with him, Thomas said. He had a pen. He told me to sign right there in the parking lot, or his people would start making calls. And you signed. It wasn't a question. Thomas nodded slowly. I signed. Then I went home and packed enough for Noah for 2 weeks, and I drove him to Savannah, and I left him with my sister, and I told him that Daddy had to go work somewhere far, away for a little while, and that I loved him. His voice broke on the last 3 words. And then I drove back to Atlanta, and I kept driving, and I slept in Macon, and I slept in my truck for 2 nights until I found this site and talked my way into a labor position. I stared at the man. In front of me, dirty work clothes, rough hands, face exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. This man had lived in his truck, had given up his son, had given up his whole life, not because he stopped loving us, but because my father had made the one threat Thomas could not call a bluff. I put my hand over my mouth. He told me not to contact you, Thomas said. His people would know if I did. I didn't know if that was true. I couldn't risk it. He told everyone you left for another woman, I said. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. Of course he did. I thought about every time my father had sat across from me in those 6 months. Patient, calm, watching me grieve a marriage he had personally destroyed, handing me those papers over and over and over. I need to get Noah, I said. Immediately. I'll call my sister right now. Good. I looked at him. And then I need you to trust me with something. He waited. I need you to let me handle my father. Thomas studied my face. Rebecca Thomas. He stopped. He threatened. Our son. A long silence. Then Thomas nodded once. I made 3 phone calls that afternoon. The following Saturday, my father held his monthly dinner at the family house in Buckhead. He hosted these gatherings every month, relatives, business partners, old friends. He used them the way he used everything as a stage. When I arrived, the house was full. My aunts and uncles, my father's business partners, 2 city council members he was close with, and sitting at my father's right hand like a crown prince, Carter Wells, the man my father had been building a future around. For 6 months, while my family was broken apart to make room for him, my father saw me from across the room and smiled the way he smiled when he thought he was winning. Rebecca, he said warmly as I approached. You look like yourself again. He meant it as a compliment. He had no idea what it meant. I want to. Say something, I said. My voice was calm. The room was already half listening. Of course, my father said. He even stepped aside slightly to give me space, still thinking this was something he was in control of. I looked around the room. Every face I had known my whole life. 6 months ago my husband disappeared. My father told me Thomas left because he was embarrassed by our financial differences. Several people nodded with the sympathy of people who had been told a consistent story for 6 months. He was wrong, I said. The nodding stopped. My father's expression shifted slightly. Your husband left on his own, he said firmly. Rebecca, this isn't the time my father went to Thomas's school. I continued, raising my voice just enough to carry. He waited in the parking lot. He brought 2 men with him. He told my husband that if he didn't sign divorce papers and disappear within 24 hours, I looked directly at my father. He would make sure our 4-year-old son was never found. The room went absolutely silent. Not quiet, silent. My father's face had gone a color I had never seen on him. That is completely he lived in his truck, I said. For weeks. Then he worked construction sites for 4 months, moving from site to site so your people couldn't find him. Not because he abandoned us, because you gave him no other choice. Carter Wells had set his drink down very carefully on a side table. My father's business partner of 20 years was staring at him with an expression I had never seen him use before. You destroyed my marriage, I said. You separated my son from his father. You watched me grieve for 6 months, and you brought divorce papers to my house, and you lied to my face every single day. My father stepped forward. His voice was low and controlled. Everything I did was to protect this family's future. No. The word came out clean and final. Everything you did was to protect your business. My family was never part of that calculation. I reached into my bag and placed my corporate keycard and my executive access badge on the table beside me. My father stared at them. "What are you doing?" "I'm going home," I said, "and home is not here." My father's voice rose for the first time. "If you walk out of this house tonight, Rebecca, I will remove you from every board, every partnership, every I know," I said. And then I said the thing that I think he genuinely never believed I would say. "That's okay, Dad." Picked up my bag. I built myself once. I can do it again. I turned and walked toward the front door. The room stayed silent. Nobody called after me. I think even my father understood, in that moment, that there was nothing left to say. Outside the gate, a car was parked on the street. Thomas was leaning against it. Noah was asleep in the back seat, buckled in, one small hand curled under his chin. When Thomas saw me come through the gate, he stood up straight. His face was uncertain. The way it had been every day for 6 months, I walked straight to him and I put my arms around him and I felt him go still for a moment. It's stillness of someone who has been braced for so long they've forgotten how to stop, and then he held on. After a long moment, I stepped back and looked at him. "Are you ready?" I asked. Thomas looked at me. Then he glanced through the car window at our sleeping son. "Where are we going?" he asked quietly. I thought about the house we'd had, the company, the board seats, the Buckhead dinners and the Forbes profiles and the family name on buildings across Atlanta. Then I thought about Thomas explaining cloud formation to a 4-year-old on a Saturday afternoon in a park. "Somewhere quiet," I said. "Somewhere that's actually ours." He was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the car door for me. We drove. Away from my father's house, into a city that suddenly felt full of possibility. My father was right about one thing. I was his daughter. I had learned from him how to be patient, how to build, how to walk into a room and know exactly what needed to happen. He just never considered that one day I might use all of that against him. The man he called a charity case is home. My son knows where his father is and the life we are building. Now, smaller, quieter, more honest than anything I grew up in, is the first thing in a long time that feels completely like mine. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between what you were given and what you actually love? Tell me your country too. I want to know who is listening. Like this video if this story stayed with you. Subscribe because next week I have something that is going to hit even harder than this. I will see you there.